Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to the second AMP Amplify webinar series. Appreciate you all joining us. Looks like we've got people tuning in from about 26 states, from Washington down to Florida, so we're pretty well covered. It's straight at noon here in Dallas. So let's talk a little bit about what we hope to accomplish with these webinar series, just to recap. Our goal is to be a low impact on your time, making it short as possible, 10 to 15 minutes, provide as much information as possible. Open up to some questions at the end there at the bottom of your screen. You'll see the little question icon. Go ahead and log a question there at any time, and we'll get to those at the end. What are we talking about today? Well, today we're going to talk about retention. Retention is very important. Retention is something that every organization who recruits providers or employs providers needs to have as one of their strategic or one of their strategies, almost siloed in as one of the process to your recruitment process. It's as an effective a recruitment strategy as you're ever going to have, because keeping your own is as important as finding new providers to come in. SKNA tells us that approximately 1 in 5 physicians, 17% of doctors, are going to change zip codes this year. That's a heck of a number when you consider how many physicians you have on your medical staff. If 1 in 5 are looking, it just proves that retention is very important. So what's unique about being part of a third party or part of a recruiting firm is the benefit that we have is that we talk to physicians from all over the country, literally daily. Just as an example, over the last 6 months, our recruiters have done 70,000 outbound phone calls, and we've done another 500,000 or so touches via text or email or some sort of marketing strategy. So we're putting a lot of output out there, and what that creates, other than placements and great outcomes for the partners that we work with, is a lot of information, a lot of opportunities to speak with physicians and discuss their motivations and discuss why are they looking, either passively or actively, what makes them open to exploring another opportunity. And that's kind of what we want to talk about today. Specifically, what we see as sort of the top 5 reasons we're hearing from physicians as to why they're making a move. And those 5 reasons, the ones that you actually have an impact on, that don't really cost you anything to help retain those physicians on staff. What I do want to say is that we're going to eliminate the 2 primary ones, which is geography, which you can't do anything about, and then the overall compensation package. Those are always the first 2 reasons physicians talk to us about. We're going to eliminate those and really talk about the 5 things that you can impact based on how you might be managing or communicating with your staff. So let's go ahead and get started. I will say that these are in no particular order, but the first one we're going to talk about today is work-life balance. So what does that mean? It actually means something different for everybody, and it doesn't mean what we often think it means. So work-life balance really is talking about the reality is that every provider has their own personal tipping point for what they're putting in and the output they're getting out, whether it be some sort of professional satisfaction, might be some sort of compensation, might be the type of time that they have for their family. Whatever that is, that personal tipping point is approached by every single provider. What we're really talking about with work-life balance is, and what we hear from providers is, here's the reality. The doctor you recruited 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 10 years ago, is not the same physician that is currently on your staff. Their life has changed, their life circumstances have changed, maybe they have different stressors, maybe they're more motivated financially, maybe they've got new children, so quality of life is more important. What we find is that organizations with very rigid, one-size-fits-all practice models tend to lose more physicians than those organizations that are developing more flexible practice options that can evolve with your physician, because the same motivations that motivate them to take your job might not be keeping them there. And if you can't revolve or provide an opportunity that does fit those motivations, then we're not going to be able to provide an opportunity that's going to keep them. Sorry, my screen just turned off there for a second, so I apologize. Hopefully everything's still going well out there. So work-life balance is very important. Let me give you a real-life example. An organization that I worked with, and how he actually tried to help his providers provide a really good work-life balance is, once a year, he was a mid-sized hospital. He had about 100 physicians or so on staff, or providers on staff. He would schedule an appointment in their clinic called a checkup from the neck up, 10 to 15 minutes of sort of dedicated time that he could sit down and say, how are we doing? How are you doing? Are we still where we need to be? Now, they didn't solve problems in that meeting because that's not enough time, but it started allowing him to identify potential problems and then starting the ball rolling on potential solutions. It was a great thing that he did, and his organization over the last 10 to 15 years has had less than 5% turnover, which is well below the industry standards. So work-life balance, what that really means is how flexible is your practice and can it evolve with your physician. The next thing that we're going to talk about today is support from administration. So what are we really talking about here? Obviously, we get this from physicians all the time. Administration isn't listening to me. The practice owner isn't listening to me. I don't feel like I have a voice, whatever the case may be. What we have found, though, is that it's not really a lack of support. What it really is a lack of communication, or if you really want to break it down, what we're talking about, or what they're talking about is a lack of access. So if we get a physician that tells us, or provider that tells us, I'm not getting what I need from administration, the first thing we ask them is like, well, have you discussed it with them? And their response, more often than it should be, is, well, I can't get a meeting, or no, they don't seem to be concerned with it, or they're not listening, or whatever the case may be. So it's really about that access point, not so much the support. It's about allowing your physicians to have a voice. And what we have found is that when we ask them, well, if they were able to change one thing or another, would you stay? And sometimes the feedback is I just felt like I was being heard. I just felt like they understood the concerns, and even if there wasn't an opportunity to change that, I at least know why, and there's transparency there. It ends up keeping folks happy, because what will happen is if they don't feel like they have access, they will go out on the open market, and there are so many jobs available that they'll be recruited away because there's always grass is greener opportunities, and a lot of organizations are sort of selling the transparency and the connection with decision makers. So support from administration is sort of really disguised as having good access to the decision makers that can actually help me fix a concern that I have. The next thing we're going to talk about as we go through our process here is complicated compensation models. So I said this might be a little bit about money, but here's what we're finding. Physicians that are in complicated models that as soon as they work really hard to try to make ends meet, somebody moves the ends, tend to be very dissatisfied. We really preach with the partners that we work with is simplicity and transparency equals trust. So what I mean by complicated compensation models is your threshold set? Are you communicating with your providers on where they are on a daily basis, whether it be quarterly or even monthly, on what their targets are, what their goals are? Are there gotcha factors that, well, hey, yeah, you achieved this, but you didn't do one of these sort of hidden things? A lot of organizations and a lot of bigger organizations have those sort of clauses within their contracts. And the discouragement and the dissatisfaction providers have by not understanding how they're being paid, which we all want to understand no matter what industry we're in, that creates conversations for organizations like us to talk to recruiters and say, well, let me tell you about this next opportunity that has a really transparent model. It's very, very clear, whether it's RVU-based or quality-based, or however you're compensating a provider. Transparency, no gotcha factors, and the physician's ability to control what they're earning by their own work is very important. So uncomplicate those compensation models. That's one of the top 5 reasons physicians are telling us that they're either passively or actively looking. The next thing on the horizon for us is RVU factors. Again, a little bit tied to compensation, but they are a factor. Here's what I'm talking about here. We get a lot of conversations with providers who are on the same RVU factor they signed when they initiated the agreement. It might be a couple of years ago. 10 years ago when we were talking with providers, they weren't really educated on how the RVU worked and how the work RVU worked and how it really played into effect. Now they're very educated. Doctors know where they're at. They know what the market is. They know what they should be compensated. Does 2 + 2 = 4? What I mean by that is, sure, every physician, or even myself, wants to get paid the 75th percentile and work at the median. We understand that. But in reality, something fair that if I'm working at the median, I'm going to earn the median. If I'm putting out the production that is going to equal the 75th percentile, I have the opportunity to earn the 75th percentile. That's all that we're really talking about. Folks want to be paid fairly, and they want to be compensated in a way that makes sense. It's surprising how often just $1 to $2 change or a moving of the threshold that costs a facility very little might actually play into keeping a physician happy. And once again, the whole goal is keeping them off that open market, because once they get to that open market and there are dozens and dozens of opportunities, they're going to hear about factors that are at the current levels of productivity, and that could be a big issue for you as a hospital. The final thing we're going to talk about today is the optics of decision making. All right, so what do we mean by that? This really impacts larger organizations, specifically systems or large urgent care or dental groups that are that have multiple sites across the country, that might have the global decision making for the entire organization. So the optics of decision making really comes down to the feeling of the physician of having a voice. We recruit a lot of physicians, and I know this is not a popular topic, but doctors leaving system type hospitals because changes that have been made from the top impacting the local providers negatively. Even though it might be good for other local sites, it might not be good for the local site there. And what they tell us is, we want to work for an organization where decision makers are on site, where we have access to them, where they're responding to our market, not necessarily the global market. We understand how business works. We understand this is kind of not a popular thing, but the reality is that their perception is their reality. And when we talk to physicians and we learn from them, what are one of the top 5 reasons you're looking to make a move? This is one of them. Feeling they don't have a voice, they don't have access, they aren't being communicated with. So these are all very important factors as we discuss what's going to keep a physician happy, primarily keeping them off of the open market, because there are so many jobs available. It's absolutely unreal out there. The average 3rd year or final year family medicine resident right now sees 50 unique job opportunities during their 3rd year residency. That's unbelievable. There's not enough weekends in the year for them to interview. So there are options out there for in-practice or residence or whatever the physicians may be. So to recap, the top 5 reasons eliminating geography and overall finances that you can impact on a work life, on keeping your physicians retained, is the work-life balance, the support from administration, complicated compensation models, RVU factors, they are a factor, understanding the optics of what the decision making is. So what I want to do now is I want to open it up to any questions that we might have. We have Matt sitting over here to the side. Let's see here. So please give an example of a simple compensation model from John Enmer. John, I appreciate the question. So really the compensation model is a math problem, is a math equation. So what we have found is very simple understanding of where the RVU factor threshold is. So if we break it down to they're making $1,000 a week and it's $500 in RVU, they have to hit 2 RVUs to break that threshold, and that threshold making sense and then getting reporting so they understand where it's coming from. That's really what we're talking about. You might still want to be on a cash-based system where you're 30, 40, 50, 60, 70% of net collections. Well, are we giving them a balance sheet on a month-to-month basis? Where the challenges get to be with really complicated is you have tiered-based RVU models, or you have tiered-based thresholds where, depending on how busy you get throughout the year, depends on what your bonus might be, and those get really frustrating for physicians. So it's about being transparent, about communicating and allowing them to understand it. It's about understanding their feedback too. If they don't understand it, let's clarify it if we can. So hopefully that answered your question. If not, my email address is here, and there's my direct line. I'm happy to talk offline with you as well, because every situation is a little bit different. So that's kind of a global answer. There might be something specific with your comp model. I'm happy to be of service and provide some insight on. So Matt, looks like we have another question.
Yeah, we got one more question.
Okay.
Our organization is going through the process of exploring the transition away from fee for service and towards quality-based incentives.
Okay.
However, we're getting quite a bit of pushback from the medical staff, especially those highly productive providers. We're concerned about losing physicians if we make this transition. What are your thoughts on quality-based models?
That's a deep question. There's a lot that goes into that. So the fee-for-service model versus the quality-based incentive model, that's happening right now. The problem is not a lot of folks have figured out how to make it work correctly or make it work to a benefit. So here's what I would say about that is the organizations we've worked with or partnered with that have done this successfully, they've sort of spoon-fed that transition. They've stayed with the salary and the RVU model, and they've started throwing in some quality incentives. And then a couple years down, they might throw in another quality incentive. Or they might leverage what the probability is or the ratios are of RVU versus quality. What we have learned, though, and one of the places where organizations struggle is that the quality incentive is not enough. What is a quality incentive? It's really to influence behaviors. Healthcare economists tell us that if you want to influence behaviors, you better have at least 10% to influence those behaviors. A lot of quality models are 5, 6, 7, 3, 4% of what they're earning. That's not going to influence behaviors, and that's going to really be a concern for the physicians that are highly productive. I work with an organization, without getting into specifics, that does a really good job of adding buckets for physicians to pull compensation from. So they have their base salary, it's flat, it's static, it doesn't change, there's no downside. They have an RVU incentive that is based off a threshold that makes sense and a value that makes sense for those really high productive RVU factor physicians. And then they also have a quality bucket that is around 8%, 10% of what the potential earning is that physicians can pull from too. So it kind of allows a physician, if they're really quality driven, they've got a bucket to pull from. If they're a hybrid, they're busy, but they can also do quality. They can pull from those 2 buckets. If they're RVU focused, they're going to be focusing from that bucket. And then eventually you can wean those RVU fee-for-service providers off over time. I'm not 100% convinced fee-for-service will ever fully go away, but just making a quick matter-of-fact change without spoon-feeding it and sort of weaning those physicians off that original model, I think probably leads to some dissatisfaction and the potential they're going to start opening them up to exploring opportunities that might satisfy their needs. So any more questions, Matt?
Yep.
All right, perfect. So, well, thank you for joining us today. That was a little longer, 16 minutes. That was the Amplified #2 web series about retention. Once again, my contact information is there. If you have any questions, concerns, anything that I can help you with, please feel free to contact me directly. We can chat offline about your specific situation. Thanks, and have a wonderful weekend.